Hello, and welcome to the Key Interaction Principles online training. My name is Saya Powell, and I work on the National Institute Operations team, and I'm excited to engage in this session with you today. Take a moment to read through our objectives. Before we get started, let's define a key interaction. This is any interaction you have had with a person that has the ability to impact their overall experience with an impression of a person or organization. These key interactions occur usually pretty quickly when people are looking for answers, asking for help, or maybe just engaging in small talk. These interactions can be positive, negative, or neutral at the start. Part of your job when interacting with core members and staff is to make sure that the outcomes of these interactions are as positive as possible, no matter where they start. We're going to start this session by thinking back to your pre-reading. You read an article called "Taking the Stress Out of Stressful Conversations," where the author identified 3 types of stressful conversations. The 3 types are: "I have bad news for you," "What's going on here?" and "You're attacking me." Since you read about these, we won't review them in full, but take a second to look over their definitions on the slide. I'm sure that you can think of at least one example of when you've experienced a conversation like this that fits into at least one of these categories. What I'd like you to think about now, though, is where you might see these pop up at Institute. Take a few seconds to reflect on your own Institute experiences, maybe personal experiences, maybe things you saw or heard about. If you don't have previous Institute experience, think about how these types of conversations have presented themselves in a professional context. One example of the first type of conversation that comes to mind for me is when I was a core member advisor and I had to pull one of my core members aside and talk to him about sleeping during sessions and work time. That was a very uncomfortable situation where I had to criticize someone who was already tired and stressed out. Another example of when I've encountered an "I have bad news for you" conversation is as a DIO, telling a core member that they can't drive to school, but instead have to take a taxi after missing the bus in the morning. The point is that something like this situation has the potential to occur at Institute, especially given the high-stakes nature of the work we're doing and the stress everyone is under during this short period of time. Take a moment to think about the short and long-term impact even minor conflicts like these can have on core members and staff if they are either ignored or handled poorly. On the slide, you will see some guiding questions for short-term and long-term impact. So maybe the following things came to mind. First, short-term impact is a core member or staff member who is distracted or frustrated and focusing on that situation instead of students. Long-term impact is a core member who disengages from staff, who feels talked down to or unable to solve problems, who operates with parents and colleagues in a way he or she has seen modeled by Teach for America staff, by ignoring issues or responding inappropriately. It's important to note here that you are Teach for America to everyone you work with this summer: core members, vendors, and school officials. They don't see a difference between full-time staff and you. You have more power than you may realize to color the perception our stakeholders have of the organization. This is something Teach for America recognized several years ago. we had an independent consultant study the program staff whose core members were the most engaged and the most successful with their students to see how they handled interactions. The consultants came up with the framework that we're going to spend the rest of this session talking about, the Key Interaction Principles, or KIPS. You read an overview of KIPS as pre-work, so I won't spend a lot of time reviewing them now, but take a second to refresh your memory by looking at the slide or in your pre-reading. The one principle I do want to call out, though, is adapt. Adapting means that you are responding to the changes in the conversation and using different principles as they are appropriate. This is something you can practice as we walk through scenarios. It can be tricky to adapt in the middle of an intense conversation, but this is how you move the conversation through to resolution and avoid falling back into your KIP comfort zone. It's important to note when talking about adapt that you don't pick a principle when you engage in one of these conversations and stick to it. Rather, you move between principles as it becomes necessary throughout the interaction. I want to make sure we emphasize that using these principles effectively and supporting your operations coordinators and school operations managers in doing the same is not just about getting through a tense interaction. It's about modeling leadership and professionalism and helping instill in core members a sense of leadership that we expect and need them to be able to display in their classrooms this summer and in their schools in the fall. When core members feel talked down to or treated like children, not only will they pull back from the essential support provided by their school staff and program staff, they will feel less confident stepping up as leaders in front of their 8th graders, parents, or administrators. In short, they will be less effective and less engaged, unless we treat them as leaders, even when it's a challenge. Also, as a manager and leader, you have an important responsibility in ensuring your staff are using these interaction principles in their work, both in their relationships with other staff and in their relationships with core members. SOMs and OCs will have a session very similar to this to provide them with concrete training on using the key interaction principles to prepare them for their interactions with core members and other staff. One thing to remember is that especially for operations coordinators, this may be one of their first professional environments, and they may be inexperienced with handling highly stressful interactions. However, also be aware that many of our operations coordinators are extremely high performers in their university settings and take on challenging roles. Some may be RAs or work crisis hotlines and therefore may have more experience or different experiences than we anticipate. The same is true for SOMs. Some may have a lot of experience successfully navigating difficult relationships at their schools, while some may not have had to engage in many of these conversations in the past. So how will we meet our staff where they are? Keep this conversation in mind when you start talking more in depth on OC management and SOM support in later trainings and leadership conference, and with your DIO throughout the spring. As we close this conversation, I hope you can see that your response in tense situations and your ability to model professionalism and leadership and to expect core members and staff to do so in turn can have a very deep impact on how core members engage in the program and are therefore able to impact their students this summer and beyond. For post-work to share with your DIO and SOMC manager, please take the next couple of minutes to think about how you will keep this in your mind as you prepare for the summer and start facing these challenges. How will you remember to treat core members as leaders and empower them through using these principles when the stakes are high? What will you see and hear if your SOMs and OCs are using the key interaction principles this summer? What will you see and hear if they are not using the key interaction principles well this summer? And lastly, how will you support OCs and SOMs if they are struggling with KIPS? Your DIO and SOMSI manager will be following up with you about your responses to these questions. Thanks so much for engaging in this session today.